Hi guys, this is James Payne. Welcome to this online drum clinic hosted by the Factory Drum Studio here in Italy. Today I will try to explain and clarify some points on the relationship between our brain, our body, and this instrument, drums and drumming. I will go through a series of topics going from feet technique, hands technique, posture, and I will try to clarify some points that I think are a bit confusing for whoever approaches this instrument. And so basically, years ago, I started to, for the necessity of the music that I play, which is extreme metal, I needed to develop very fast motions without getting tired very soon and without losing power and dynamics throughout the shows, but also throughout tours. And since it's a very physically demanding kind of music, and there was very little information in the area where I grew up, I had to really kind of figure out what was happening in my body. And the first question that really started to clarify or open the doors for my entire instructional methods that came throughout the years was the fact that I knew what my body wanted to do, but my body could not execute the motions that I want my body to execute. So it was kind of like a catch-22 question, because it felt like there were two people in the room, which was my conscience, like what my brain wanted my body to do, and my body that wasn't able to execute those motions. So I tried to find information, and honestly, most of the information that I found has been in the scientific world, not in the drumming world, which it was very fascinating. And so today I will try to also back up some information with some scientific researches that I made that really helped me clarify a lot of what happens on the drums, and I hope this can be of help for you guys out there too. When I first started to approach all the technique development, I found a lot of methods that talked about developing muscular strength in order to be able to play fast for long periods of time. So building muscular strength to have endurance on drums, but starting from the fact that my body isn't designed to sustain a lot of physical effort, I had a really hard time in having positive results in those type of ways of practice. So that also pushed me to search information in other places, and I started to see a lot of read some books on rehabilitation, and I found a lot of answers of what happens here on drums. And so in that moment I realized how practicing technique and developing technique, it's not most, like for me at least, that has not been mostly develop muscular strength, but has been re-educating my body to move in a more efficient way. And when I started to implement these theories and these approaches on my technique and my approach, it really made a huge difference, because everything was effortless and way more ergonomic. Of course, a little bit more difficult to develop, because you need to develop way more control on what you were doing. And in that moment, I kind of gave a definition of what technique is that really clarified a lot of things for me to approach any technique in this way, which is technique basically for me is an efficient way to using my body and taking advantage of the external forces like the spring of the pedal or the rebound. So it was the opposite of what a lot of other drumming methods were suggesting, to develop, to go and build muscular strength, do endurance exercises or practice with weights on my ankles or many other things that for me never really worked. And so I kind of understood how for me it was the opposite. The approach was the opposite of that. So it was not feeling effort while speeding up and while practicing, and that basically allows you to stay relaxed, and so to have endurance, more power, and the possibility of playing faster. So what is technique? To me, it's an efficient way to using my body and taking advantage of external forces. And so to be able to do that, I have to stay synchronized and to learn how to be synchronized to the external forces, like the sticks with the rebound and the different rebounds that the drums offers me, and on the lower part of our body, the springs, of course. And so the spring tension and all the pedal setting makes a big difference, and we'll go deeper into explaining this in the technique part of this video. But the synchronization concept was something else that really helped me, and also giving specific words to each part of this development of technique really helped me, because words are the tools that kind of makes us understand what we're aiming at. So it's not an abstract concept, it's not something not precise, but it's a specific, precise thing. And so also practicing becomes more efficient, because I know exactly what I'm aiming at, instead of just kind of like throwing my hands and letting my body kind of figure out on its own how to fix certain things. But I help my body with concentration and with literally understanding to go through the process, which sounds very like abstract and philosophical, a philosophical approach, but in reality it's the opposite. It's a very practical way for me to spend every minute that I'm on the drums and or on the pads or whatever I'm doing, like really taking out the best of every minute. So what is practice? To me, is literally going after specific things while I'm practicing specific concepts, and not just, aiming at multiple things at the same time, like for example practicing technique with a metronome all the time, which is already applying this technique to regular timing pulse. But like getting rid of information made sense, because I knew exactly what I was aiming at. So of course, to be able to be synchronized to the external forces, like the sticks, the rebound, or on the pedals, the springs, you have to have an amazing control of your body in order for the body to be able to adapt to whatever the external forces are requiring from it. So that made me go back to my initial question, which was, if I know what my body should do, why isn't my body able to do what my brain wants it to do? And so I had to go and do other researches, and I found a lot of explanation in the neurological studies that they have on how our body and our brain work literally to be able to execute motions. And basically what happens is that our brain sends input to certain parts of the body execute those motions and gives a feedback back to the brain, which tries to figure out a more efficient way to execute those motions in a more comfortable and ergonomic way possible. So that's literally what happens when we're practicing technique or any body motion. And that is also part of how the rehabilitation process works, or the re-education of our body motion works. And so that really answered to the question of why, first of all, why my brain and my body are kind of disconnected when I start to practice, and I started to try to develop all this technique, but also on what it means to practice. Like, how should I spend the time? When do I know that what I'm doing like the time that I'm spending in doing exercises is transforming in progress and information for my body, like useful information for my body, and not confusing or making things worse or not really changing anything at all. So basically from there, I started to understand how also concentration is a huge part of all this. Without concentration, my body will be on autopilot. So if I practice hands while I'm watching TV, nothing is really happening there. My body is just on autopilot, repeating all the things that my body already knows how to do, both the good things and the mistakes. So there's really no improvement. But also if I'm practicing and I'm not focused on where I'm practicing. So concentration, it's the most important thing in while practicing. And also concentrating, it's a muscle that we have to train. It's very hard to be able to stay concentrated for long periods of time. So that also answered to the question, how long should I practice every day? Should I practice 8 hours or should I practice 1 hour or 3 hours? And basically, the amount of time that you can stay concentrated is the productive amount of time that you're spending on your instrument, as far as educating your body motion, re-educating your body motions. Then all the other part of the time that you spend with not being very concentrated and maybe just having fun on the kit or just repeating songs that you have to play live, that's more of a physical practice. So they're both good, but it's very important to distinguish the two things. Like if you practice technique watching television and then you train your body being very concentrated only on your bass drum patterns, then you're kind of like using the practice session in the opposite way compared to a more efficient way of being concentrated when you're educating your body motion and creating synchronizations between your body and the drums. And the second part, which is a more a physical training for your body to still be able to play drums for many hours without injuring yourself or without getting tired, and also applying all the parts that you develop in the technique part. So the first part of my body that I started to work on were my feet, because of course of the music that I play and the necessity of my music, which is to go very fast with the bass drums without losing volume, without losing dynamic. So the first step has been to work on my body, making sure that my body could execute the motions even before going on the instrument, and isolating the various part of the body that I use while playing the pedals. So the most basic motion, which is the leg motion, and usually the leg motion is a spontaneous motion that we do, because basically when we sit on the drums for the first time, our body, our brain detects kind of like an obstacle between us and playing the bass drum, which is the pedal. And the way it solves how to deal with the pedal is to use the bigger muscles, because it's easier for our body and our brain to connect with bigger muscles that are also closer to the brain, which also that it makes a difference in educating our body. So it's easier. Bigger muscles have more connection to the brain. So when we then have to shift to the ankle motion, so for the faster speeds, because of course the leg has more mass, has bigger muscles, there's more bones. And so when we start to speed up, the leg motion starts to become too much effort for certain speeds. So we shift the control to smaller parts of the body, which are the articulation in this case, where we only have to deal with the weight of the bones of the feet and not the entire leg, which also that's a big deal for us. So my body at the very first times, it couldn't really isolate completely the ankle motion to the leg motion. It was kind of like a hybrid motion where my ankle was doing like 50% of the motion that I needed my ankle to do. So it would go until a certain point, and then the rest was kind of like the leg was coming in to help and conclude this motion. So I had to literally work on blocking my leg and making sure that my ankle, my foot was only moving, isolating. And in doing this, my brain started to recognize control 1 and control 2. And then, of course, you transfer all of this on the pedal, adapting it with the spring and with the synchronization to the pedal. So the body motions are the first thing that really help us to understand if our body is working before applying it on the drums. And already here we will find how complicated it is to develop these specific motions and for your brain to recognize exactly what is one thing compared to the other. Of course, the same process then I did on my hands. The hands are a little bit more complicated because, of course, we have the fingers that have different roles, and there's a little bit more details and more work, but conceptually, it's exactly the same thing. Actually, the first thing that I realized was that there were many similarities between the feet motions and our hands motions. So if I play heel up ankle motion, the same thing, for example, is German grip, or push pull, it's like heel toe. It's the same kind of concept. The Muller, which is a lateral control of the rebound, could be associated to the swivel, which is a lateral control of the rebound. So when I kind of found these similarities between the two parts, I understood that I could apply the same concept back to the hands. And so I did exactly the same process, not in the same order, because I started with the feet, I started with no pedals, with no gear, and then I kind of adapt everything to the gear. Over here, I started already trying to synchronize my hands to the rebound and to the stick in using different grips, German grip, French grip, or different techniques. But then every time I had a question like, how should the thumb be? Should the thumb be here or there? How should my index be? How should, my hands position? Should it be like this or like that? Then I would go back to the natural position of my hands, and that was always the right answer. Because of course, if I follow the design of my body, I will stay in a more natural position, so more relaxed position. And so every time I had a doubt and I had a question about this, I would go and execute the motions without the stick and observe my hand. And so I also understand how many information there are in my body. My body is like a big YouTube. Okay, there's a lot of information, and I can do the same researches that I do on YouTube, I can do in my body by just executing motion and observing how my body works with and without the sticks or the gear or the two hands. So I do a lot of unison exercises, or also using different senses of my body. I can see what happens, but I can also close my eyes and concentrate on the feeling. When it feels comfortable, usually I go back and look at it, and it looks good. It looks in the natural position, because the body is automatically kind of loses the reference, the visual reference, and so it looks for another reference, which is just being comfortable. Or you can listen to what you're executing. So also using different senses of the body for the same topic, it's also a great tool that you can use to practice, especially technique and especially on the pad, but also on the drums, really. So also here, a very important thing, for example, for the synchronization between the hands and the sticks and the rebound, on the pedals we do have the spring that does the work, and it's a constant force. It's really tangible. You can really feel the spring working. the rebound, sometimes it's not so easy to feel it. So doing exercises where you literally open your hand in a moment of impact and then follow the stick back up can really develop this approach and this way of following the stick back, and so being synchronized, completely synchronized to it, instead of lifting the sticks, which it's not a big deal when we play slow stuff, but as we start to increase the speed, of course, the mass that we have to like lift hundreds of times per minute starts to become a big deal for our small articulations. So generally what happens is that we create tension, and because the small muscles cannot support so much physical effort, and so they go and ask, they get stiff and they ask support from the bigger muscles, and so we end up playing with the bigger muscle, but everything is already tense. Instead, if we're synchronized, it means that the rebound does the work for us. We just follow the stick back up, and we just have to lift the weight of the bones of the hands, which our muscles are used to do that, and it's 50% of the work is done by the rebound. And so being synchronized also gives you this great benefit. Also because if we think of what speed on drum is, if it's not building muscular strength, then what is it practically? Like, what's the concrete answer to what speed is reaction. The faster you react, the faster you will play. So being able to react, because of course the rebound wants to push the stick back up immediately, and the spring wants to push the beater back up immediately on the pedal, and the only thing that is blocking this immediate rebound is our body. So if we learn to react, to play coming back, following the stick back up, then we will increase the speed. Instead of playing towards the surfaces, that means that we choke the stick, we start to decrease the volume, and there's no space for anything to happen. Instead, reactivity is what allows us to play fast. So if we have to think about going faster, we have to think of training our body to react faster to the rebound and the drums as fast as possible, to be ready to play the next stroke. So of course, a very important thing then to be able to apply all the feet motions on the drums, it's balance, which is a consequence of my posture. The way that I sit and the height of the stool and the distance from the bass drums, and also the position of my body determines how I deal with my weight on the instrument. And so knowing how to sit on the drums, on the stool, it's very important in order for me to be able to free my ankles, to be able to execute all the motions, all the ankle motions that I need to execute. And so the way that for me makes more sense for the stool height is to be able to, when I raise my foot without pressing the beater on the bass drum, but just keeping the foot parallel to the ground, basically, so freeing the ankle from the weight of the leg, is to know that I'm sitting at the right height. I would need to have 90 degrees between my leg and the upper part of my body. 90 degrees because if I'm over the 90 degrees, I will have to start using more muscles. So if I sit very low, it will be physically more demanding to raise my legs in order to free the ankles. The opposite way, so sitting very high, would help me to have my ankles free, but generally it tends to, for the slower parts or the leg motion parts, we tend to shift our balance towards the front because of the extension of the legs. So it's kind of like for reaching the pedals better, we tend to go moving our body and our balance towards the front. So instead, having the 90 degrees here, it's perfect for the leg motion parts, and it's not, it doesn't require any effort in raising the heels and freeing my ankles. So balance is very important for being able to, of course, free our ankles. And there are two types of balances. There's the leaning towards the front or the back that we have to learn to correct by taking advantage of the stool and sitting at the right height and at the right distance, but also lateral balance, which usually one common thing that happens is that if a drummer is used to keeping the hi-hat closed the entire time or most of the time that he plays drums, he tends to lean towards the hi-hat. And instead, if he tends to have the hi-hat always open and play more double bass drum, it tends to lean towards the right. Then everybody's different, but this is a common thing that I see when I work with many students. So taking in consideration both balances really makes a big difference, and it really helped me to work on my balance. And the posture of our head, the position of our head, if we're used to playing looking down, looking our bass drum or the snare, the weight of our head will kind of like tend to lean us towards the front. Instead, if we keep our head position like in line with the stool, then that helps us to maintain a good balance. Also when we're playing on toms and extending our arms to reach cymbals and other parts of the drums. Another big part of knowing how to sit on the drums is to know how far we should be to the bass drum. So how far the stool and what is the angle in the knee part of the leg. And the answer to this, I found it by understanding the angle of the ankle, really. So by raising my foot, so to do an ankle motion, if I'm very close to the bass drums and I sit very close to the bass drum, I will have this part of my body kind of like in line with the knee, the shin part of the leg in line with the knee. And so when I raise the toes, I have this angle and I feel a lot of tension in this area. If I keep the same angle and I move the foot a little bit in front, I can see how much space I gain, not with changing the position of the foot, but just by sitting closer or further away from the bass drum. So of course then, if I sit too far away, I have the opposite problem, which I extend these muscles too much. So I have to find a way in the middle that is comfortable. So the answer to how far or how close we should sit to the bass drum is found by analyzing the relationship between the inclination of the foot and the position of the leg. So once we know how to control our body and we make sure that our body does the correct motions, we can then go back on the drums and start to apply all these motions on the pedals and with the sticks. So the first step to do this is to make sure that our ankle can sustain and can get synchronized to the pedal motion, and so with the spring tension of our pedal. So the spring tension here has a specific role. So we will have to set our spring tension based on our body preparation. So if we set the spring tension very tight, then the pedal will be very fast. But if our body is not as fast as the pedal spring tension, then it will be very hard for us to control and stay synchronized to the pedal. So we will have to find the right tension, and then the more we improve our body motion, the more we can modify the spring tension based on our needs. Once we have this synchronization with the pedal, we have to go through a set of exercises or make sure that we never lose this synchronization with the pedals. So, for example, one very important thing is to know how fast our pedal is, just like naturally by the spring tension that we put. Based on this speed, we will know that slower, from this speed to slower, we will have to work against the spring, because this is the natural speed at which the spring moves our pedal. So if we want to go slower than that, we will have to work against the spring, meaning that we block the spring work, and so it will be easier to do that with the leg motion, because the weight of the leg beats the spring tension easily. There's no effort, just lifting our leg and letting the weight go down to go against the spring tension. Instead, going from this speed of the pedal to faster, we can isolate the leg to the ankle and just work controlling the pedal with our ankle. Okay, so also knowing what part of the body we should use based on the speed at which we're playing at and in relation to the spring tension, it's another very important thing, because everything is connected, because we have to stay synchronized. So this clarifies also what type of technique or what part of the body I should use to, depending on the speed that I'm playing, and then also make sure that I never lose the synchronization when I switch to one part of the body to the other, so from the leg to the ankle motion or swivel or heel toe, depending on the technique that we're using. Also here, going back to talking about posture, we will have to try and not shift our body weight in front and backwards depending on the body part that we're using. So not leaning towards the front when we use the leg motion and then leaning towards the back when we switch to ankle, but always keep our posture like balanced on the stool even when we are changing the body position, because it will get us, it will improve our timing, and it will help us to be more balanced and more relaxed on the kit. So all this makes us understand how our brain, body, and the drums are connected. And so one of the most frequent questions that I get is about warming up. How should we warm up before practicing or before a show? And surely warming up our body by doing push-ups or running or jogging helps us to have blood flowing in the areas that we then use playing drums. But to me, warming up is not only warming up the body by having blood flowing in the area that we need, but also getting in this connection between the brain, our body, and then this ourselves with the drums. So it's also finding the synchronization and tuning in with the instrument literally. So I start with speeds that are comfortable for me, and then the more I feel, this connection building and the blood flowing in the right areas of my body, then I constantly, I push up the speed and increase the bars of the exercise that I do, so that this becomes like the fundamental approach of my drumming in that moment. And I do that, it's like turning on an engine, literally for me. Okay, it's not only the body itself, but it's also the connection between me and these external forces, which is the rebound, the spring, and then the different surfaces that I'm playing on that give different rebounds. And this happens every day. This is the first thing that I do before practicing or before playing a show. And I also think that this thing that I do, this type of warm-up that I do, has helped me throughout the years to never get injured on the drums, because I get this connection and then everything flows. Of course, not every day is the same. There are days where you're more tired. There are days where it's more difficult. And so, but I also can feel that. I can feel that one day I'm not 100%, and so I understand what's happening in my body. So I think that warming up has this role of having the blood flowing, but especially connecting us to the instrument and to these external forces. So of course, all of this is in function of the final step, which is actually playing drums. To me, playing drums, it's a very fascinating thing, like playing music, playing an instrument, because it's literally communicating through an instrument, a musical instrument. And what that means, if we think about what happens when we improvise on drums, is exactly the same process that happens when we speak. When you speak, we don't think about things and then speak them, tell them, but you speak, and then once you said the thing, you realize what you said. So it's an unconscious process, and it's possible because we learn words, we learn grammatical structures, and that help us to put these words in the right position, in the right places, to then communicate with other people. And the same thing happens here, basically. When we improvise, we learn words, and we learn then grammatical rules that helps us to communicate. But there's an extra step, which is coordination, which is technique, because this is a more difficult process than articulating, our mouth and our tongue to kind of like share recognizable noises that through which we communicate. Here we have 4 limbs and we have 1 brain, and one brain has to control 4 limbs at the same time, but we can only think about one thing. So how does this process work compared to speaking? Is that we create what coordination also is. It's basically one limb leads and the rest of the limbs basically play in relation to that one limb. So this would be the next step after the technique, is to learn how all this process in our brain works, and how through controlling one part of our body, the rest of our body follows up. We have a very common experience with this if you're double bass drum or double pedal players, because our left foot usually is a slave to the right foot. But really that happens constantly because we can only think about one thing when we're using 4 limbs at the same time. So that's also a very fascinating topic. Today I will stop here, and of course I hope that this helps you guys out there to clarify some things, and I hope that these words and this understanding of the relationship between the brain, the body, and the drums helps you to improve your practice and your drumming, as it did for me. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you to Factory Drums for hosting me for this special event. I'll see you next time.